Good evening, good evening. This is Pastor Quentin J. Morris, Sr. of the Tremont Temple Missionary Baptist Church. I'm so excited to have you with me tonight as we share in our Wednesday night Bible study. It's a blessing to be alive. It's a blessing to be able to still share God's word and let you know that you're still blessed and know that you're still a child of God. It's just a blessing to be here tonight. Tonight we'll be in Psalms 95. But prior to going to Psalm 95, I feel obligated as a servant of God, as a mouthpiece for the gospel, to share my feelings and thoughts on the reopening of the state here on Friday. I want to let you know, first of all, my heart is heavy. I will not speak any negativity about our governor because I am a leader and I know what it's like for people to speak negative about me and my decisions. But I will say, as a Christian and as a Christian leader, I feel God has given us wisdom, which can be translated as common sense. I have made a lot of silly decisions in my life. I've done a lot of foolish acts, done some dumb things. But one thing God has given me through it all is common sense. And I think I'd like to use what's called the wisdom of God this week and next few weeks as we take our time before we reintegrate back into our society as being normal. History repeats itself. If you look at the early 1900s, somewhere around 1918, the Spanish flu, one of the world's greatest pandemics that hit the world. When the first wave came through, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around 3 to 5 million people was killed. And they was practicing social distancing in, but they lifted the ban, and the pandemic came back worse. And it went from 3 to 5 million to almost 15 to 20 million people was killed. All I'm saying tonight to you, my sisters and brothers that's listening on Facebook, YouTube, or whether you're on the prayer line, let's be careful. And I always say, as for me and my house, I'm going to add something to it. As for me and my house, we will worship the Lord. I'm going to add this to it. As for me and my house, we will worship the Lord from the house. We don't have to stay safe. Be wise. If you look at Matthew, I think it's Matthew chapter 12. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Matthew chapter 12, around verse 43 through 45. And it talks about God delivering the individual from an unclean spirit. And when God delivers you from it, don't go back to it. Even though we have went a week or so with no deaths, we still have a lot of cases in Chatham County here. And what happened in Matthew chapter 12, verse 43 through 45, we see that when individuals go back and get the unclean spirit that God has delivered you from, that spirit is 7 times strong, because it go about and get 7 more spirits. It come back 7 times stronger. All I'm trying to tell you that if we're not careful, we'll go back to our regular worship, go to our beauty shop, get our nails done, and 2 or 3 weeks later, we're going to realize that things may be worse. Now, I may be wrong, and I pray that I am wrong, but I'm still going to lean on the err on the side of caution. Because we'll go to church Sunday or next Sunday, won't anything happen. But 2 or 3 weeks later, we'll realize that people are sick. You cannot have social distancing and people doing your hair and doing your nails. I think Dr. Eric Mason said in one of his posts on Facebook, you can get your nails and hair done and you look good in that coffin. Listen, it's not the first time your hair hadn't been fixed. Not the first time you haven't had a haircut. You can go a few days without getting your nails done. Listen, my mama never went to get her nails done. She took time to file and clip and done her own nails. I spent some personal time doing some home economics around the house and being safe. Amen. So I won't trouble you long, but I feel we will take our time, and that's for Tremont Temple here in Savannah. We will not go back to worship this week and next week. It'll probably be at least after second Sunday in May, just to see how this thing pan out. I hope I'm wrong and pray that I am, but we won't get the results of these next couple of weeks until 2 or 3 weeks from now. Amen. So I will get off that soapbox and jump back into Psalm 95. Psalm 95. This here is a powerful psalm, especially for a time like this. It's talking about God is worthy of our humble and obedient worship. Even in the midst of a pandemic, even in the midst of unprecedented or unusual times, we must still worship God. We are commissioned to worship God. We must humble ourselves enough that we're not that prideful that we cannot worship God. If God has been good to you, you have a reason to give him some worship. Amen. So we're going to go through it, and also just for a few theological nuggets, Psalm 95 is analyzed in Hebrews chapter 3 through Hebrews chapter 4, Hebrews chapter 3 verse 7, all the way to Hebrews chapter 4 verse 13, 3 and 7 to 4 and 13. This is analyzed by the writer of Hebrews. We don't know who the writer of Hebrew was, but we can say he analyzed this and he referred to Psalm 95 as in David. That's why many people believe that Psalm 95 was written by David. We're not sure, because the Hebrew writer could be referring to the entire book of Psalms as in David, or the book of David. Many people refer to Psalms as the book of David. We know Psalms does not have any chapters. It's only have 5 different divisions, 5 different hymn books. So it's no 23rd divisions, no 51st division. It's 23rd Psalms or 51st Psalm. There's only 5 different divisions. They broke about every 40 different by every 40 books is a different book. Every 40 Psalms. So like first about Psalm 1 around Psalm 40 and 41. It goes like that. So we divided up. And so here we want to look at how and who should worship God. In verse 1 through 2, we see that there's many forms of worship. And here, we're in our home. We're in churches with no people. We're in homes doing Bible study. Pastors doing Bible study on the patios, in the garage, in an empty church, and then pastor study. You got to understand, we still can worship God. Because I was sharing with someone the other day, matter of fact today, that regardless if we're in the building or not, the church is still going to be the church. The church is not the building. The church is in our heart. So those that's going to give, if they got it, they're going to give. If they got tithes, they're going to give their tithes. You know, I know some people don't have. Some people they've been laid off, and my heart goes out to those workers that have been laid off, those waitresses, those waiters, and many other jobs that they feel quote unquote not essential, but they still have bills that's essential. So our hearts and prayer go out to you all. So they can't tithe. They love their church just the same. They can't tithe. They can't give. But those that have it, guess what? They're gonna pay. They still gonna worship. They still gonna come. You're not gonna lose members, pastors. You're not gonna lose member Christian leaders because of a pandemic. If they are Christians and they solid, they're going to get close to God even more. Matter of fact, they draw their family in closer, because this is a time that we got to realize that God is still in control. Amen. Let's look at verse 1 through 2 of Psalm 95. Psalm 95, verse 1 through 2. We talk about worshiping him in different forms. It said, oh come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with song. Let us sing to the Lord. This speaks to the community. This is not just an individual. I don't want to just shout and sing by myself, because God has been good to me. And many people are just so selfish that they can feel God has just been good to them. But listen, the same God that bless you with whatever you drive, he blessed me with my hoopty, and I'm just as happy. The same God that bless you with a house, he blessed me with a roof over my head. I'm just as happy. So that's why I can say, come let us. Everybody ought to have a let us crowd. Let us shout, let us praise, let us worship. We have a lot of crowds. We have crowd of friends. We have crowd of family. We have fraternity brothers, sorority sisters. We have Eastern Stars. We have Large Brother. We have people that's on our job. We have people in our community. Guess what? You better make sure you have a Let Us crowd that can sing praises unto the Lord for what he has done for all of us. We ought to be able to look around and see God's goodness, not just because of what we drive or where we live, but if he woke you up, we all got to let us. If he kept you in your right mind, you got to let us. Let us, as the writer here said, oh, come let us sing unto the Lord. Listen, I'm not the best singer, but every now and then I sing about his goodness because God has been good to me. He said, not only let us come, let us sing unto the Lord, but let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. When they talk about shouting joyfully, you ought to have some excitement about God. You should have some enthusiasm about God. You should have some energy about God. There are times where you should have some solemn worship. There are some times you should have some sober, quiet moves in church, but that shouldn't be the focus, because when you think of his goodness, it's hard to hold still. Jeremiah said, I want to quit. I want to stop. I want to be quiet. I want to sit down. But there was something on the inside that wouldn't let me hold my peace. I want you to understand you should have a shout, have a joyful shout to the rock of our salvation. And you got to understand, we're talking about the rock of our salvation. That really talks about not only from an experimental standpoint, but also a theological standpoint. Rock meaning based on experience, I'm still standing. A house is standing because of its foundation, the rock being the foundation. Theologically, I'm still standing because I hadn't lost my mind. Do I have anybody that been through so much that you shouldn't be standing? Not because you didn't have a good foundation. You had a great foundation, but the stuff life have taken you through, you should have lost your mind. And that's why many of you can shout with a shout of joy, say, I praise God, I don't look like what I've been through. That's why you can say, he's my rock of salvation. So when you shout, you're not just shouting because he's your foundation, but he's also kept you when you couldn't keep yourself. Do I have a witness out there? It said, come let us, before his presence. Come let us before his presence. Come let us before his presence. That means when you come to worship God, you're not coming before the presence of the people. I know we got people, we normally have people in our church, we have people in our audience. But when you sing in the choir, when you're doing praise and worship, when you're leading hymns, doing devotion, just singing to yourself, you're not singing to the people. You're singing to God. And that's why you got to understand choir leaders, choir singers, devotional leaders, deacons, preachers. When we sing, and we're not singing to see how well we can shout the people. We're singing because we're in his presence. I don't care what the people say. I want to hear God say, well done. That's what you got to understand. That's why it says, oh, let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. When I sing, when I worship, I'm doing it because I know God is watching. That's all God wants you to do. I want you to understand we come with a joyful shout, but we come to him because he's our rock. Then we come, let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. God's presence, God's people don't sing in empty spaces. We sing to a God that loves us. Yes, I'm preaching to an empty living room right now. I'm teaching to an empty living room, but the ears of God are listening to everything that I say. When I preach and I'm doing a service to an empty church on Sunday last few weeks, it's an empty building, but I want to hear God say, well done. And wherever you are, know God is watching. Know God is listening. It says with thanksgiving, our worship should express a heart of thanksgiving to God. When God will use people, God will use things to get his blessings through to us. And so you got to understand, when God bless us, I don't care how it came. I don't care how the stimulus check came. I don't care who signed it. I don't care which direction it came from. I don't care where the promotion came from. I don't care who your boss was. You better learn to give God thanks. I don't care what medical school he went to. Give God thanks. I don't care what law school he went through. Learn to give God thanks. With thanksgiving, every part of our worship should express thanks from our heart to God, because God done it. God will use people, use situations, use things, and it's a permanent petition to him. We write it in our heart. We sign a petition that God, I'm giving thanks to you for what you have done for me. Do I have anybody here you worship and thank him for not what he does, but for who he is? Amen. So that's verse 1 through 2. And verse 3 through 5, we want to talk about not only different forms of worship, because you worship him through shouting with joy. And right now, during this pandemic, we worship him from our home. We worship him off computers. We worship him off iPads, television, the prayer line, telephone. We worship him different ways. And so there's different ways to worship. But here in verse 3 through 5, we want to talk about the greatness of God to be worshiped. We worship him because he's great. The Hebrew boy, Shadrach, the boy in the fiery furnace, he said to the other two guys there with him, he said, if God don't show up, and really he wasn't talking to them, he was talking to everyone else. If God don't show up, God is able. And you got to understand the greatness of God should be worshiped. When he don't do anything, you got to know he's still able. Do I have anybody know that God is still able? Verse 3 through 5, it says, for the Lord is the great God and the great King above all gods. That God has a lowercase g. In his hands are the deep places of the earth. The heights of the hills are his also. The sea is his, and he made it. And his hands formed the dry land. Let's look here and say, for the Lord is the great God. Understanding the greatness of God help you properly worship him for who he is. And many people just think we go to church and say he's God. But when you understand God is above everything, when you understand God has all power in his hand, if God was a person, when he walked in the room, the whole world would bow down in adoration. Most people and most everyone have a sense of awe and appreciation of God, but do we really understand his greatness? I don't care how powerful one man may think they may be. It doesn't matter how much money you have, how much power you have. You're never compared to the greatness of God. That's why the writer here, we just want to say David. Let's just say David. For the Lord is great, is the great God, is the great God. That lets you know that other people, they have formulated within themselves that they have enough power to be a God. Listen, I don't care who you are or what you think you can do. You don't have enough power to be a great God. And you can make a God out of anything. Anybody can make themselves a God. People can make themselves a God. You can make a God out of anything. But David says, for the Lord is the great God. Meaning he's better, he's above, he has more power than any other God that you can think or imagine. And he says, and the great King above all gods. And it has a lowercase g in this new English Standard that I'm reading from, signifying that everything else is smaller than your God. Any thoughts, any imagery, anything that you have is smaller than your God. So you gotta understand there's nothing greater than your God. I wish I could say he's a great God. Amen. It says, in his hand are the deep places of the earth. In his hands are the deep places of the earth. One way God's greatness is illustrated is by his majesty over creation. From the lowest valley to the highest hill, from the sea to the dry land, God's hand formed it all. I don't care who's who, but tell me somebody, name one person that put a star in the sky. Name one person that put clouds. Name one person that caused the grass. It said from the highest mountain to the lowest valley, from the dry sand to God formed it all. That lets you know how great God is. We shouldn't, and we can't ever forget how great God is. Just think about what he done to creation. He said the sea is his, for he made it. The ocean and the seas of this world belong to God. whatever nation may claim the sea, whatever country is bordered by the sea, whatever continent sits on the outside of the sea, it still belongs to God. I know you may have the deed to your property, the mortgage to your home, but I want to bust your bubble tonight and let you know it still belongs to God. And so this just speaks to our heart tonight to let you know the greatness of God to be worshiped. When I think about how great God is, that's enough for me to worship him. Now look back over your life and think about all the great things that God has done for you. Think about all the great things that God has done for you. Do you have a reason to worship him? I think about how many people that you know has been sick. How many people, besides the COVID-19, take away COVID-19. People are still dealing with layoffs. People are still dealing with other sicknesses. People still dealing with issues around the house. They're still dealing with people. There's family members with children in prison. There's people with grandmothers in a nursing home that they can't visit. There's people with family members in the hospital they can't see. There's people who have loved ones that have died. They can't even go to the funeral. Don't you know we have a lot that God has helped us through? And we couldn't have made it through if we didn't have a great God. I'm here to tell you, you can't make it by yourself. So in verse 3 through 5, we see the greatness of God to be worshiped, or should be worshiped. When you think about how great God is, he's over everything, we should worship God. Verse 6 and part of verse 7, it gives an invitation to humbly worship God. And one thing about worshiping God, he gives us a free will. God is not going to make us a robot. He's not in the business of making robots. So he's not going to make you worship him. But God will allow things to happen that will cause you to humbly worship him. And I'm going to tell you, in the midst of COVID-19 and you watching people pass away in New York and other places, if that's not causing you to worship God, I don't know what will. And I want you to understand, and I hate to jump back on COVID-19, don't take this lightly because it's not here in your house. Don't take it lightly because it's not in your neighborhood or on your street. Listen, I have had pastor friends and preachers and bishops. I know all those bishops from the Church of God of Christ there. Listen, this thing is serious. Don't think it's just a hoax with some people trying to say. No, COVID-19 is for real. But God give us a humble invitation to worship him. God does not make you worship him. We ought to just be humble enough to bow down and worship him on our own. If not, he has ways of sending things our way to worship him. I don't want God to make me worship him. I want to humbly worship him. Let's look at verse 6 and part of verse 7. It says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God. For we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand." We're going to start right there at part of verse 7. Oh, come. This is a sweet sense of emphasis on the word, oh, come. This is a gentle plea here to exalt the reader or the believer or us to do what's right before God. This is just a gentle nudge to worship God. It said, oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Bow down is now where it said, let us. Once again, it's calling for community. We talk about more than one. Let us bow down and worship. Repeat it. And bowing down is a sense of humbly surrendering to God. It's not surrender like I have the gun at you. You get down and bow down. No one have a spear, a sword at you. No, we gonna come and bow down and worship him. And many believers in the midst of worshiping God, they just crying out to him, and sometimes they just bow down and worship him. And people that don't understand or may not be in that place, they be like, why they bowing down? Why they going down on their knees? Listen, when God has been so good to you, you don't mind humbly surrendering and worshiping him. That's all they're doing in his presence. Man must bow down before him. A man must need God more than God needs you. Don't ever think God needs you. So you got to be willing to kneel down before him sometime. I remember the time when the deacons prayed and preachers prayed. They would go on their knees and pray. Matter of fact, families, before they went to bed at night, they would pray on the side of the bed. And I'm not going to ask you, do you still get on your knees and pray? Because I know there's some of y'all out there that's listening like, Reverend, if I get on my knees to pray, somebody's going to help me back up. I understand that. I'm not going to say a word. I'm going to leave that alone. But they would bow down as a sense of, I'm surrendering to God. That's all it's saying. And they humbly done it. It said, let us kneel before him, our maker. And our maker signifying that you're kneeling down and God has made us and not we ourselves. In the previous verse, the song spoke of God's majesty over all creation. Now he includes humanity. And not only God that made the world, but God made us also. So we cannot worship the world and thank him for the world, but you also thank him for making you. He said, let us kneel down before the Lord, our maker. You got to realize, if it had not been for God, it wouldn't be a you. If it had not been for God, you wouldn't have your spouse, you wouldn't have your family, you wouldn't have your mama, you wouldn't have the father. So we got to understand, God allowed us to worship. But you got to humbly worship him. No one shall make you praise God. When I say let's give God a praise, I say somebody ought to give God a praise. Somebody ought to worship God. Somebody should worship God. Somebody should stand. I won't say get up on your feet. That's not me. A lot of people do it. I don't do it. I won't say you should, you better clap your hand. No, I'm not going to make you clap. I think you should clap your hand. You should praise him. You should worship him. But I can't make you do it. Because maybe God had done for you what he done for me. Maybe God had done for you what he done for somebody else. But many people, if they don't get the response they think, they say, you stand up on your feet. You still sitting down. They almost want to chastise you because you're sitting down. Listen, if you want to sit down, sit on down. That's on you. But if God done something to you and you have the energy and you have good knees and you can get up. I don't do it because I know everybody can't get up. Some people have bad knees. Some people in a wheelchair, they can't get up. They want to get up. But if you can give them a praise, I don't tell you how to praise them. You ought to just praise me any way you can. And somebody said, if I can't say a word, I just wave my hands. So he says, for he is our God and we are the people of his pasture. Yahweh is worthy of our humble worship. Yahweh, Hebrew word for God. God is word because we are the people of his pasture. I say Yahweh because it speaks in a term that Hebrews understand. It talks about the people of his pasture as if he is the shepherd and we are his sheep. And he take care of us. I want you to understand, even though we're not physical sheep, lambs, but God definitely take care of us. And he repeats that over and over. And we see in Psalm 7 how he talks about reference Jehovah or Yahweh. If you try to do the translation, agree. These are terms that when you look at the original translation, talk about Jehovah, talk about Yahweh. God is over us. We are the people of his pasture. We are his sheep. And he would take care of us. And because he's taking care of us, we ought to at least worship the one that take care of his people. Amen. Let's go a little further here. Verse 7 through 9. It gives warning to those who reject worship. Be careful when you reject worship. And this is about the B part of verse 7. I'm thirsty. I went a little bike riding today, so I'm drinking my water. So don't just sit around the house. This not Bible study, but don't just sit around the house do all that good cooking and eating, because I don't want to see none of y'all on the 600-pound my 600-pound life show later on. Amen. I want you go do some walking around the neighborhood, go ride a bike or do something. We got to stay active. And so I just finished exercising. I'm still trying to cool down. So today. The B part of verse 7 through verse 9, it talks about warning to those who reject worship. If someone worshiping God different than you are, it's okay. But don't speak against it. Because everybody worship in a different way. And look what it says, the B part of verse 7 says, today, if you will hear my voice, do not harden your heart as in rebellion, as in the day of the trial of the wilderness, when your fathers tested me. They tried me. Though they saw my work. And I'm going to tell you, one thing you don't want to do, you don't want to test God. You don't want to try God. It said, today, if you hear my voice, the psalmist once again exalt us. He says today, if you hear his voice, he's talking to us, hear the voice of God in the midst of your worship. If God speak to you in the midst of your worship, you listen to the voice of God. God spoke to his people and gave them words of warning. And I'm going to tell you, I know we have given the okay to open back up, but you better listen for his voice. Listen to the voice. Listen for the voice of God. He said, if you want to be true worshiper of God, you better listen for the voice of God. I want you to, your pastor out there, if you're not my member, whatever, listen to the voice of your pastor, but through the voice of your pastor, you should hear the voice of God. God should speak to you. He said, but when he speaks, don't harden your heart. And when God speaks to you, do certain things, have you go in a certain direction. Don't just sit back and say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this ministry. I'm going to do what I want to do. Listen, you're rebellious. Don't reject worship. Don't reject worshiping God. This is a warning. This one is important. And it's important to be referenced because we see it in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7. We see it in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 15. We see it again in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 7. It talks about this warning here. We are the sheep of his pasture. And God speaking to us, and don't harden your heart and as in rebellion. People that do not listen to God's voice, they are rebellion. And there's other scriptures that say rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft. That's some people that just want to do it that way. Listen, worshiping God and living for God is not like Burger King. You cannot have it your way. I wish it was that easy, but you can't have it your way always. So do not harden your heart as in rebellion. Harden your heart. Some harden their heart by resolving to demonstrate emotional and spiritual hurt. They blame others for their pain when they hurt. Listen, things do hurt. Some people harden their heart when God delay his coming. Some people harden their heart when they cannot have their way. When they criticize, some people harden their heart. When they're around evil company, some people harden their heart. When they're in the midst of people that amuse and entertain wicked and evil from others, people have caused you to harden your heart. But if God is speaking to you, you better listen to the voice of God. I wish I had somebody say, listen, I'm going to listen to God's voice. And one thing about the voice of God, he may not always tell you what you want to hear, but he always give you what you need. Amen. It said, though they saw my work, look what it said, when your fathers tested me. We test God by unbelief. And I'm going to tell you, Georgia, Savannah, Governor Kemp, we can't test God. God has started to kind of heal a little bit, and now we're going to go back out there in the same place that God just starting to heal. We cannot test God. As soon as Jesus had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, as soon as Jesus came out the wilderness, he was tested by Satan. Satan stood there and said, if you're the Son of God, turn these stones to bread. He knew the man was hungry. If you're the Son of God, cast yourself down from here. If you're the Son of God, allow all these kingdoms to worship. You cannot test God. When you have seen God work in your life, when you've seen God work in somebody else's life, don't test God and try to say, God, well, if you God, you do this. And listen, Pastor, I got some pastor friends out there that say, my faith is strong. Listen, my faith's strong too. But I'm not going to test God. My faith's the same place it's been since I gave my life to Christ. That my faith has not wavered. And my faith is not wavering right now, but I'm not going to test God. It says, when your father tested me, their unbelief, Israel saw the work of God, yet would not trust in him. They did not trust him in the wilderness, but they did not trust God. God allowed things to happen, but yet they rejected him. So today, we as believers, we cannot test God. though we saw my word, though they saw my word, they saw God work. And when you saw God work in somebody's life, know he can work in yours. It may not be for you. It may not be for you right now, but you got to trust him. If God done it for others, he can do it for you, if it is for you. Amen. Amen. So we're going to go to verse number 10 and 11. Get ready to close out. Verse 10 and 11. It says, for 40 years, I was grieved with that generation that tested him, that generation that would not believe in him. For 40 years, I was grieved. God offered the generation that came out of Egypt the opportunity to take the promised land by faith, but they did not trust him. Believers, I want you to trust God. And what happened to that generation, God had to kill all that generation off because they did not trust God. Do not allow God to be so good in your life, in your family life, down through the years, and you can't trust him right now. It says, for 40 years I was grieved. God was grieved with that generation. He brought them out of Egypt, gave them opportunity to take the promised land. What could have took them 40 days of walking took them 40 years. Their unbelief and rejection of God, it grieved him for 40 years. It was evidence that they went astray. And the Hollywood says and said, it is a people who go astray in their heart. Listen, people can say whatever with their mouth. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not fooled by what people say with their mouth. People say, I love you, Pastor, I love you. But your heart is not there. People say, oh, I love that sister. That's a good brother. People say whatever with their mouth. But God looks at the heart of man. I want you to understand, he says, and that's why I say they want to strain their heart, because the Israelites, the Hebrews, they say they love God, they follow God, but they did not trust him in their hearts. Believers, I want you to trust God in your heart. I don't care how bad it get or what it look like right now. You got a God that's worthy to be trusted. He said they went astray in their heart. The desert wandering was a symbol. The desert wandering was a symbol and a consequence for their wandering of their heart. They wandered in the desert so long because their heart was wandering. And sometimes that's the same thing for you and I. We stay where we are so long because our heart will not change. Our heart stay in the same place. When our heart changes, our situation change. When our situation go toward God, our circumstances go toward God. He said they want to strain their heart. Their heart was constantly at fault. Their heart was away from God. It's one thing to say something with your mouth, with your head, but you err in your heart. Make sure your heart is pleasing God. There's some things I may not say right. Sometimes my subject verb may not agree. Sometimes that Bama grammar come out. But I want you to know one thing. My heart is right. My heart loves the Lord. My heart loves his people. I think about David. David made some mistakes with his mind and with his action. But God said David was man after my own heart. And David was Israel's greatest king. I want you to make sure, my sister, brother, that you have a heart that's pleasing God. Look what it says here. This should be the scary part. Say, they do not know my ways. A lot of people that's in our churches, a lot of people that say they Christians, some people that pick up a Bible, some people that can quote scripture. He said they do not know my ways. To know God is to trust him. Unbelief is evidence of small and faulty knowledge of God. When you don't trust him, that's evidence. When you don't believe in him, that's also evidence that you don't have a strong relationship with God when you don't trust him. When you trust him, that's evidence that you say, I know God. God may not give me what I want, but Paul said in Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord. And it goes on to say, so I swore. So I swore in my wrath, and they do not know my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter in my rest. So he said, so I swore in my wrath. God did not honor their unbelief. God did not honor the people in their unbelief. They didn't realize they were Israelites or not. It was an insult to him that they did not trust him. And it's just like being a parent and you ask your child, do you trust me? And they say, no, I don't trust you. You're going to let me drown. No, I'm not going to let you drown. I'm your parent. I'm your father. You say, I'm your mother. I'm not going to let you drown. That's how you got to be with God. If God have you in the middle of the ocean, and he say, do you trust me? You say, yes, God, I trust you. Even though the water may be going over your head at time, you got to know God has you. And I want you to understand, it goes on, this is the scary part right here. It says, and they shall not enter in my rest. God condemns Israel's generation for unbelief. He condemned the whole generation of unbelief. And they died in the wilderness. So that generation, so the generation of faithful believers could enter into the promised land. Let's close out here by saying God had to remove the unbelievers from the believers so they can get to the promised land. I want you to understand, sometimes, my sisters and brothers, sometimes God is separating you from people that's not trying to go where you are. Everybody that's with you are not with you. Everybody that's going in a direction with you may not be going to the same destination as you. If you want to know what type of person you're going to be in 5 years, look at the people you're hanging out with right now. If you want to see where you're going, look at the crowd you're keeping. If you want to be with the eagles, you cannot hang with the chickens. If you want to be spiritually inclined, you cannot hang with people that don't have faith. So I want you to understand, God is worthy of your worship. He's worthy of your humble praise. No one should have to make you worship God.